Hey everyone, this is Jassel from Geek Public Radio bringing you your criminal fix. Today we're going to be talking about Pecos Jane. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss out.
Robbery has turned into a potentially explosive
Check.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I have Crazy Chris off camera with me tonight, and today we're going to be talking about Pecos Jane.
I totally waved, by the way.
You did. You missed it. He waved like you could actually see it.
Hello, everybody.
All right. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about, like I said, Pecos Jane. Pecos, Texas is where this story comes from. Pecos Jane was a young woman that was found at the bottom of a pool, motel pool in particular, in 1966, July of 1966. So she, sorry, I'm used to him being on camera still, still getting used to him not responding. So she and a man checked into the Roper's Motel as Mr. and Mrs. Russell Batwan on July 5th of 1966.
Baton.
Batwan.
Baton.
Yes.
All right, sorry.
Batwan. Which is pretty much how I said it in my head as I was, doing all my research and notes.
All I have is Ratatouille in my head when you said Baton, and I was just like, meh. Sorry to all of our Canadian listeners. I'm sorry.
Okay. So
Look, French Canada is totally a thing, and I'm probably
is.
butchering my French right now, so I am sorry for them.
doesn't Ratatouille take place in France though?
It does.
Okay.
But I don't.
That's why I was confused about the
I'm
Canada
just
reference.
having a really hard time imagining that criminal fix, although popular, may not make its way to France.
Hey, I bet you we do.
Probably.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know we're popular in Belgium, though. So, yeah. Guten Morgen.
I have no idea. I am not skilled in the
Good Morgen.
fluidity of other languages.
All right. Anyways, back to Pecos Jane.
Yes, Pecos Jane. So they had been lounging by the pool. They've been seen lounging by the pool. He was drinking beer. She was drinking soda. And this is as reported by Sandy Moore, who at the time was 15. She was there visiting her grandparents who managed the motel, and she would help out with cleaning, waitressing tables, doing the check-ins and check-outs and the front desk work. She originally is from Clovis, New Mexico, but like I said, she would go and spend her summers there with her grandparents at the motel, helping them run things. So Sandy describes this woman, Pecos Jane, as having long dark hair, full lips, olive skin, and she had a red one-piece bathing suit on. This is when she sees them lounging by the pool earlier in the day. So about 3 hours after Sandy had originally seen them, one of the maids comes rushing into the office, and she's frantic, and she's broken English, and so she wasn't really communicating very well as to what the problem was. So she just takes Sandy off to the pool, and is like, there's a body there. There's somebody at the bottom of the pool. So Sandy, instinctively, as most people would, jumped into the pool, fully clothed, tried to get the woman out. She failed twice. And by this point, there's a bunch of commotion. Another one of the residents, or whatever you want to call them for people that stay at the motel, patrons that was at the motel, heard the commotion and was like, what's going on? And then he saw the woman at the bottom of the pool and jumped in with Sandy, who was already in the water. And between the two of them combined, they've managed to bring Pecos Jane to the surface, where they called an ambulance. Sandy went back to find out what room she was in. They went to the room to find Mr. Russell Batwan taking a nap. So they let Russell, we're just going to call him Russell, know, hey, the woman that you were with was found at the bottom of the pool. We called an ambulance, so on and so forth. And so he, of course, is awake and he proceeds to get his registration card because they asked him for his registration card to identify who they were to the cops. And Mr. Batouan decided to leave with the registration card in a dark colored sedan. That's all they have on as far as the car goes, is a dark colored sedan. Very not that good of information when you're talking about all of Texas. So I'm
picturing the Archer in my head right now where they're clicking through. He's like, oh, is that it? Oh, is that it? When they're doing the satellite imagery and they're clicking on all the cars. When they're
trying to stop the coyote.
The coyote and the station wagon. So they're just clicking on a dark sedan. He's like, oh, is that it? The traffic cam. Oh, is that it? I literally just pictured that in my head right now. So go ahead.
Look, there's Archer. That really the only way they had to identify either the woman or the man was off that registration card. And the only thing that could be remembered off that registration card was the name, which was Mr. and Mrs. Russell Batouan. They imagined that when he got into his car, he was probably going to the hospital, where his wife was being taken. And that ended up not being the case. Once they got to the hospital, Mrs. Batouan was announced dead upon arrival, and he never showed up. So they also put out a be on the lookout. He wasn't a suspect. They didn't necessarily see any obvious signs of foul play. So they just put on a be on the lookout because they want to know where this guy went, why, and who this person is that, they have deceased now in the local hospital. So they did a search for the names. Because after a couple days, nothing surfaced. And so they searched for Russell Batouan. And the only Russell Batouan that they could find was an active duty Marine in North Carolina.
I'm guessing, shot in the dark here, not the same guy.
Not the same guy.
Oh, weird.
So for some reason, these two were traveling under fake names. Now, the Reeves County Sheriff, A.B. Nail, did not open this to be a homicide case. They had no proof of foul play. And even though they didn't know who Mr. Russell was, they also knew that he ran, but they had no reason to suspect him of anything other than the fact that he ran and that they were traveling under fake names. So they never actually opened a case to really look any further into this once the autopsy was done. It got ruled as an accidental drowning. And the only thing that the autopsy report showed was that she had about a quarter-size abrasion above Jane Doe's, because obviously they don't know her name. She's Russell Batouan, pulled up nothing. So above her left cheekbone. And they were unable to determine if that abrasion came from them pulling her out of the water. Maybe she got scraped against the bottom of the pool while they were trying to get her up. They couldn't tell if that was something that happened in her rescuing from the pool or if it happened beforehand. So they had no reason to suspect foul play other than the suspicious behavior by Russell, who we're just going to call Russell. So no identification being made. Jane's body was sent to a local funeral home where she was embalmed and held, waiting to see if anybody would come and identify her or claim her body, which nothing happened from that. It did make national news. Her whole story made national news, which is, pretty big in 1966. It wasn't as easy as it is now to make national news. But tons of people would contact the funeral home either in writing or calling or stopping in and saying, maybe it's my loved one that's missing, but nothing ever came of anything. The closest that it came to potentially figuring out who it was there was this couple from Odessa, which was not that far away, couple from Odessa that thought for sure that this is their daughter. They thought she looks like her, as best as you can look like somebody's daughter when they're deceased. But dental records ended up not matching. So obviously it wasn't their daughter. Now, those...
Could you imagine being a parent and your child is missing, and there's this big national case, and you're trying to figure out desperately if that's your child? That's got to be wretched.
I can't even imagine. It's got to be heartbreaking. I mean, a mother is part of why this case got reopened, as we'll get to. So, but those same parents from Odessa were so taken by the resemblance. They were so taken by her story, the fact that nobody was coming forward to claim her. So they started a drowned girl trust fund to help with any arrangements so that Jane Doe could be properly buried. Now, not people from the community pitched in. The funeral home donated a wooden casket. They weren't sure of what her denomination was, if she even had one. And so a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister were who conducted the funeral service together, which roughly had 50 people show up. None of them knew who this girl was. They were just so taken by her story and the fact that she was just alone. And so they were taken by it. And so they pitched in. They wanted to, they felt the need for somebody to mourn her. And so they did, which I think is pretty awesome of them, because a lot of people just be like, oh, whatever. It's somebody we don't know. Who cares? Then they move on with their lives. Whereas these people were far less self-involved and therefore, cared. The town pitched in and got a very simple headstone that just said unknown girl drowned, and then the date that she had drowned, July 5th of 1966, because no name.
Right. And this is obviously a more modern photo. You could tell by the solar lights, but this was I'm assuming this is recent, and
it's slightly recent.
Yeah. So it's really sweet. They didn't have to do that, and and because of their efforts, they were able to get her something at least that people could come pay respects.
Right.
And just a location where this is where she lies. So if somebody were to ever come forward with information, at least
she'd have a proper burial.
She could get a proper burial and an exhumation if they needed to do a new autopsy or confirm or whatever they needed to do. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah,
and even one of the local stores went ahead and donated a blue polka dot dress for her to be buried in. So they really went all out taking care of this woman that none of them even knew, which I think is very heartwarming. I mean, now, I think that's just something that's very heartwarming. Now, the minister... Sorry.
No, I was just saying I agree.
So the minister is quoted by saying, quote, "This girl is not known to us here, but most certainly she is known to God. If there is someone somewhere who cares for this girl, may they know she is now surrounded by love, or in love by those who care." End quote.
It's a good minister.
Yes.
Well done.
The pallbearers ended up comprising of sheriff deputies and police officers. Again, because no one was there, no one knew her, but the whole town, the whole community just, and then some, pitched in, to make sure that she was properly taken care of.
Except for Mr. Batouan.
So for years,
not to be confused with Mr. Batouan in North Carolina.
Yeah, right. For years, after, Sandy Moore would continue to go visit her grandparents every summer. And whenever she was in town, be it summer or any other time, whenever she was in town, she would stop by the grave, pay her respects. So, I mean, it was, she held on to that. I mean, that's something that, especially at 15, you don't just forget happened. It's not something that you easily just, oh yeah, that happened one time. It's not a trip to the mall. It's a little more in depth than that.
I imagine this place still stands, and if it does, it looks like this. So this is a great place there, Roper's Motel. Looks awesome.
I honestly, I remember reading whether or not it still stands, and now I can't remember off the top of my head.
Hey, that's a Google search away. Let us know in the comments below.
I mean, the pool isn't there anymore. I definitely saw photos of the pool, not withstanding any
Yeah,
further.
that does not look serviceable. Although
Yeah.
with enough drink, I might
You might
dive
try and
into
dive
that.
in anyway.
Yeah, it looks like if you give me a good diving board, I'll definitely do it. I will stay off the top rope, though. That will happen.
And then, as you saw in that other photo that you showed of the gravesite, people didn't forget her. The community remembered her, and they brought flowers and they put the lights next to her headstone, and they remembered her, and they continued to mourn her and keep her as a part of their community and as a part of their family, because they didn't know who her family was. So yeah, the way that whole town is, it just warms my heart. I think really it does. So decades pass. No one's claimed her. No news. No nothing. Sorry, I am brain farting. The case never was an open case, so there was nothing to research. And it was in 2014 when one single email set off a chain of events that led to the case being reopened. Now, this was through genetic testing and genealogical research that they were finally able to identify who the town knew as Pecos Jane Doe, or Pecos Jane for short. They found that she did have a family, and that family never stopped looking. That family never gave up hope. Yeah, that's her sister. You can wait for that one though. So
Sorry, I lost the image and I had to bring it back over, and I was like, "Is this the right one?" I'm panicking over here. You guys can't see me. This is why I'm off camera. I was panicking. I was like, "Okay, sorry. Go ahead." Email chain of events. Never stopped looking. Go.
So the closest they were able to get out of anything out of Pecos Jane was in ink. What looked like from a ballpoint pen was written on the bottom of her right foot, and it said Joe, Joe, and then in all capital letters, Lean, Lean. So it was longhand for Joe, and then all capital letters for Lean. But they tried to, separate it, see if they could find some kind of real name out of that, but it really didn't lead to anything. So no one really knows why that name or those words were put on the bottom of her foot. At best, it was like a Brangelina or Benifer.
Now, was this a tattoo or
No, it was pen.
just a ballpoint pen?
It was ink, yeah.
Okay.
So it was just written there. So Pecos Jane does have a name, and now we know her name as being Jolene Hemme. Jolene was the 9th born of 15 children. That is a lot of kids.
There's a proper name for that amount of kids. It's called a shit ton.
Well, it was a family with 15 kids, mother, father, 15 kids, and she grew up outside of Salina, Kansas, on a 160-acre farm, where she turns out she was raised Catholic, and lived a typical farm life, especially back in the 60s, where everybody woke up early, everybody took part in the chores. The guys mostly went outside, handled the cattle and whatnot, and the women stayed in the house and they did the cooking and the cleaning. And they would do this before they'd go to school, and then they go to school, come home, and do their homework and their other chores, for the farm had for them. Now, her siblings said that she was very shy. She never had a boyfriend growing up, and she would much rather read than take part in conversation. So she was a little bit of a loner, and just quiet, just shy and quiet. Shortly after graduating, though, Jolene moved to Kansas City, where 2 of her sisters already lived, and she would kind of bounce between the 2 houses. She kind of split her time between the 2. Sometimes she'd stay over at Caroline's house, and sometimes she would stay over at Joyce's house. Now, Joyce was the sister she was closest to. Joyce is only 14 months older than her. So closest in age. And then, often that leads to, especially with a family that big, that leads to you most likely befriending the one that's closest in age. So she was a waitress. She waitressed at one place during the week, another place on the weekends. And she said that she was saving up to buy a house or a car or maybe go to school. She wanted to be a secretary, apparently. That was her long-term goal as far as jobs go. She wanted to be a secretary. So, like I said, of all of her siblings, she was closest with Joyce. And Joyce and Caroline had met Russell, but they couldn't remember his name. He was just kind of a blip on the radar. It wasn't something worth retaining. And so they didn't. And, but Joyce didn't like him. Right from the get-go, Joyce didn't like him. She didn't think that Jolene was treated very well, and that he was kind of controlling. Now, this is off of accounts, a lot of Jolene's stories and information that she's getting from Jolene, and making her decisions more off that than actually knowing the guy, because otherwise she'd probably remember his name.
It's a fair assessment.
Yeah. So Joyce did encourage her sister to just drop the guy. He's older than you. Drop the guy and, find someone new. There's better guys out there. So on July 1st of 1966, Jolene invited Joyce to go to the movies with her, Russell, and one of her girlfriends. And Joyce turned down because she already had plans with her own boyfriend to go fishing. So she turned her down. Now, that night, Jolene never came home, nor did she the following night or the following night. And the two sisters started wondering where is she at. So they're checking with all of her girlfriends. They're checking with her work. They're checking everywhere that they can, and they're not finding their sister. And so they report it and found out that Russell was apparently missing as well. And the police just kind of shrugged it off as they probably ran away together. They'll be back.
That was super typical in the 1960s.
I'm
not actually being funny.
I'm not sure if you're being sarcastic.
No, I'm not actually being funny. During the 60s, the lead up to the Summer of Love, missing persons, that was a big, not really that big of a deal, because a lot of times youth would, get their wild oats and they would go off with whatever. They would go, I'm being kind of silly when I say this, but, they would find a Volkswagen bus full of like-minded people, and they drive across the country getting stoned and listening to music. So it wasn't unheard of for that to happen. So police were probably just like, she'll be back. She'll, 3 kids later, you'll see her again.
Yeah, exactly. You don't worry. She'll be back. It's no big deal. Well, they found out that Jolene never picked up her paychecks from either of her jobs, her last paychecks. Now, Joyce did receive a postcard that was postmarked from Las Vegas, July 3rd, 1966. And it said, "Joyce, well, I got lost. See you in a couple weeks. Maybe, Joe." She still has the postcard. Or she saved it. Now, this note was immediately suspicious. That's her sister holding it, by the way, Joyce. She was immediately suspicious because that handwriting doesn't look like Jolene's. And Jolene never went by Joe. Joe was never a nickname that she used. No one used it for her. She didn't use it. So between the handwriting and the Joe, she was like, no, there's something amiss here. Now, around the same time, their mother got a similar postcard. Now, the mother upset, tore it up and got rid of it. Whereas you can see Joyce kept hers. Everyone in the family looked at these postcards, and everybody agreed that Jolene did not write them. That was definitely not her handwriting, and they couldn't recognize whose handwriting it was. So at least they know, though, at this point that somebody was in Vegas. Maybe Jolene was, but that's all they got. That's all they had to work with. And police still didn't really open anything up. They're like, yeah, see, she'll be back.
So even after being told, this is not Joe, this is not her handwriting, this is not something she would say, this is not the nickname she goes by, this isn't even her.
Yep.
Police were like, nah.
Maybe she was drunk.
Nah, she's fine, brah.
That's. I mean, I can
Apparently,
imagine that's probably what they would say.
also
Well, she was in
stoned.
Vegas, and they probably got hitched, and she was probably drinking when she wrote the postcard. Like, I could easily see somebody saying that.
I mean, that's pretty clean handwriting for drunk. I mean, it's lined up and everything. Like, I've written drunk letters, and I'm going to tell you right now, it does not look like that.
I don't think I've ever written while I was drunk, so I don't know.
I've texted drunk, and I can't imagine it's any better.
Yeah, it can't possibly be better. So Joyce and Caroline proceeded to put flyers up all over Kansas City in hopes that somebody would see them, knowing something, seen something, anything. But it didn't return any kind of results. So at first they thought maybe they went to Vegas to elope, but the police, but they searched those marriage records from that time and nothing showed up. The only places they know that the couple went to during this time, of course, this was not around the time that she disappeared that they're looking at this. This is way later. But I'm sorry. The only proof they had of her being anywhere was potentially Vegas and then in Pecos, Texas. They don't know where they were in between. I mean, surveillance cameras weren't what they are now. Your neighbors all have surveillance cameras now. So if they're walking down the street, they're likely to see something. Whereas this was not the case, back in 1966. So no one knows where they were until they showed up in Pecos, Texas on July 5th. So they thought maybe there's a famous rodeo that happens in Pecos, and they thought maybe the rodeo took them there, but they tried to find maybe somebody, maybe he was, the boyfriend was listed as a participant in the rodeo or something along those lines, but they couldn't find anything. So they just kind of were like, okay, well, we don't really have a connection here. We have no idea what brought them to Pecos, and we don't know why they stayed the night. Maybe it was just passing through. Maybe it was to be there for the rodeo. Maybe they wanted to see the rodeo, not to not take part in it. So I
just searched for the most ridiculous rodeo image I could find, and I can only imagine that this is what it is. This is Pecos Bill, by the way.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure how you can lasso a tornado, though.
Are you saying Pecos Bill is a liar?
I think maybe the artist is, if they're trying to say it's fact.
No, that's just the legend of Pecos Bill. He absolutely lassoed a tornado.
Well, in the meantime, before we find out that this is Jolene at the bottom of the pool, in the meantime, the family hired private detectives. They did everything that they could, especially in that time, to try and find their daughter. She was only one of 15, but I mean, most parents aren't like, oh, well, we still got 14 more, and then they forget about her. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I feel like that's not good parenting.
No, that's really bad parenting.
Like dogs can do that. Dogs are like, I had 13 puppies. I'm good with 12. That's fine. The other one's fine. Probably went to Vegas and got married. It's fine.
But people don't do that. So they continued to search. They continued to look. On their mother's deathbed, she actually said to her kids that were right there that she could see Jolene and that Jolene was waiting for her and that she was going to see her soon.
That's sweet.
It is. Now, her father lived to be 101.
Are you serious?
Yes. 101.
Okay.
Now, and before he passed away, up until the day he died, he wanted to know what happened to his daughter.
I mean, how old roundabouts were they when she disappeared? Does it say, or do you know? I would assume probably mid-30s.
No, younger.
Oh, my. Okay.
She just got out of high school.
Okay. All right. So, like, maybe early 30s.
17, 18.
No, the parents.
Oh, the parents.
I was like,
I thought you were talking about Jolene.
That's an interesting dichotomy. I'd like to see that breakdown.
Well, she was the ninth born.
Okay, so they might have been closer to 40.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this case went unsolved for decades. I mean, it wasn't until 2014 that we even reopened the case.
Well, that's
or
what
even
I'm,
made
but
a case.
that's what I'm getting at. Like he might, if he was 30 years old when she went missing, which we could assume he's probably 40. But if he was 40 years old, 71 years.
He must have been older then.
That's crazy.
He must have been more like 50
Man,
when she graduated.
I can't. No more. I'm done. I got 3. I'm good.
Right?
I mean, 9 would be cool, but I could field a baseball team. 15, I'm most of the way through an offense or a defense on a football team. So I don't. You know what? No, 15. Yep, I've got a new number. Go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, the family missed the national headlines, which, I mean, just because the headlines went national doesn't mean it went to every single paper. So it isn't unlikely that they would have missed the articles revolving around her story.
You said the farm was in Salina, Kansas, right?
Yes.
And so I don't imagine that the Salina newspaper was very keen on fielding missing persons report when they were probably more concerned with what the weather was going to be, whether the crops were coming in, whether they were going to be able to farm that year.
Well, Joyce and Caroline were in Kansas City, though.
No, that's fair.
And I'm not sure where other family was dispersed, because that's a lot of family to track down. But the ones that she moved to be around were Joyce and Carolyn, and they were in Kansas City. So, like I said, 101, and he continued to speculate all those years on what happened, where she is, always wondering and never giving up, like a good father. Because that's what your parents do when you're missing somebody. You don't give up. So once they knew for sure that they found out who Jolene was, of course, they contacted the family. Now, looking back at the information about the writing on her foot, they thought maybe, like I said, that it was some kind of clue of maybe his name was Joe and her name was something that made the combination be Jolene. She never went by Jolene, although some people did pronounce her name Jolene. Her name was actually Jolene. So the combo thing didn't pan out to anything, because even if his name was Joe, that's a pretty common name. It's kind of hard to narrow down a bunch of Joes to one particular Joe that happened to be in Pecos, Texas. So, I mean, you can ask, why travel under the fake names? Why did he flee? Why, in that some 55 years before they figured out who she was, did he not come forward with anything? I mean, he could have anonymously come forward with anything, a note of some kind saying, hey, there was a woman found in Pecos, Texas, drowned at the bottom of the pool. It was your daughter. Something, anything that could have, just given them closure rather than having to live for so long not knowing what happened. Now, fortunately, we did find out what happened, but I mean, not with his help that we know of. If he is still alive now, he'd be in his 80s. They pegged him as being roughly 10 years older than her. So he would be somewhere in his 80s, they believe. So how do they find out who she is exactly? And this is kind of interesting and exciting because it's actually going to lead us into our next episode. because this is kind of a newer thing with how they've started to solve all types of cases. So the Department of Justice has roughly 40,000 unidentified deceased individuals in morgues, evidence locker morgues, as well as, your regular morgues and funeral homes and whatnot that are holding on to them. And that number grows roughly by like 4,000 every year. So unless you're solving more than you're finding, that number's just going to keep getting bigger. And unfortunately, that, seems to be the case. But a lot of times, I think they said they call them orphan children, whereas they're just people that they died and they don't know who they are. Nobody's actively knocking on the doors, screaming, where's this person? I mean, look at Gabby Petito. I mean, they made a big enough fuss that they got national attention, and luckily they found her. I mean, not in the manner you want to find her, but they found her, and it wasn't 55 years later. So people like that are insistent on my daughter's here, but they also had more clues. They had more to go with versus where Jolene's family didn't have much to go on. They had no idea she was in Pecos, Texas. They believed maybe she was in Vegas, but that's not. Vegas and Pecos, Texas aren't exactly next door to each other. So it's not much to go on, and you're kind of connecting blind dots at that point. So a Tennessee man named Todd Matthews found what he thought was a need for a database of missing and unidentified people. So missing and identified persons. In 1999, he helped launch such a database. It was a volunteer-run network called Doe Network, where amateur sleuths, private detectives, families, anybody could go on and insert information that they had about their missing person, or that could maybe potentially match with somebody else's information that they're putting in. And they would get thousands. They very quickly got thousands of cases every year. And they solved several hundred cases based off of just that network, which is, pretty awesome. And then in 2007, the Justice Department created the National Missing and I'm sorry, I can't talk today. National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and they called it Name Us. The Justice Department used Matthews to help create this system. So now it's pretty much Matthews' system, only with the full support of law enforcement.
Oh, only took him 8 years?
That's it. I mean, government run. That kind of answers that.
If they had to get the funding from the, funding place.
Now, Matthew,
I have other things to say, but this is not this show.
Well, Matthews was hired on to help create that database. And in doing that, he inserted a lot of information that he had from the Doe Network in order to maybe see if any more cases could be solved. And even more cases ended up being solved because of that. So in 2014, like I said, we're going back to 2014 again, Matthews got an email. Matthews directly got an email from somebody only going by JCJ. It ended up tracking it back, ended up being a Hotmail account in the Netherlands. So way out there. So it simply stated, quote, "There is an unidentified girl buried in Fairfield Cemetery in Pecos, Texas. She isn't on Doe Network or Name Us or anywhere, and I was wondering if she could be added." End quote. Is this Russell?
I don't know, but that's the Netherlands?
Yeah. I mean, heck, if he was guilty of anything,
it was a lot easier to leave the country.
Or even thought
60s.
he was, even thought he was guilty of something. It was a lot easier to leave the country then. and just rebuild some new identity elsewhere.
Yeah.
You weren't competing with databases like you are now. And DNA and fingerprints. And I mean, you had all that stuff back then, but not like you do now. So he asked a colleague, and he also sent him like some news articles and stuff saying, here's some proof of this, proof of that, whatnot. So he asked one of his colleagues, Mike Nance, to look further into it. And Nance, despite the death certificate listing her age at approximately 19, and witnesses, including Sandy Moore, guessed that she was somewhere between 18 and 20. Pecos Jane may have actually been a juvenile. So he went off on a limb. And in 1984, of course, we have America's Most Wanted, John Walsh, who started the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And so he checked there. Now, of course, we're still working off of little information. And the senior forensic case manager at the NCMEC is how they keep putting it. There's just a lot of letters. I feel like it might be easier to say
another alphabet stack. Yeah, go ahead.
Another alphabet stack for the alphabet soup. So a senior forensic case manager ended up calling to Pecos, Texas, and got in touch with the chief of police there, Lisa Tarango, who had moved to Pecos, Texas when she was just a baby in 1969. So, of course, she didn't know a whole lot about this story. But she looked into it. She became their police chief in 2018. So, obviously, years have passed at this point, because this is cold cases like this. When you're working with hardly anything, I mean, they take a lot of time, and a lot of times they get kind of pushed aside for something a little easier, but they're still working at it. They're still plugging at it. So she never really heard much about the case, but she immediately started hitting roadblocks when she started looking into it, because the files were missing, including the autopsy. So who knows where they went? Who knows what happened to them? Back then it was all on paper, so anything could happen to them. Accidentally thrown out, who knows? But the funeral director that took care of the funeral services and whatnot for Pecos Jane was still there, much older, ready to retire. But he had Polaroids from the autopsy and from being on the embalming table, and so Tarango took those Polaroids and had a facial reconstruction made in hopes of maybe being able to use that facial reconstruction to locate who this person is. So between the news stories that obviously were still around that they could, go back and look at, and the Polaroids, they were able to come up with a facial reconstruction, but it still didn't really give them anything. So they decided the next best bet to try and identify who Pecos Jane was through her DNA, which of course means exhuming the body. And in 2019 is when they did exactly that. So now examining an exhumed body, which of course they found that the wooden casket was plenty disintegrated. So mostly what they had was a skeleton. And they had skeletal remains to work with, and that's pretty much it. So when the forensic anthropologist looked at these remains, they said, this is a young woman, white, between the ages of 15 and 18. So young. So bone fragment got sent off for DNA testing. And they compared it to the main database, of course, which is the FBI's database, but they got no hits, which, considering the fact that it wasn't developed until the 90s, I mean, her DNA is highly unlikely to be on there. But, hey, it's worth a shot. Might as well look. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to find any answers. But in some off chance, you just might. So a newer investigative method is now being used and started being used fairly recently. It's known as forensic genetic genealogy. So the method combines DNA analysis and traditional genealogical research. Now, ever since places like Ancestry, 23andMe, and all of them, they say, I mean, there's a ton of them now. They started doing the DNA kits, right? People would send in for their DNA to be analyzed for potential health risks with, genetic diseases and whatnot, or just finding out where their family was from, trying to find their other relatives through their DNA. And so those people were able to take the information that they got from their test results and put them on places such as GED Match, which is a public database where you can try and find distant relations via mapping your DNA. So when you upload your information to those sites, you have the option to allow your information to be used by the federal or by the government for the law enforcement for solving cases and the whatnot. So and apparently a lot of people are like, sure, why not? Which, I mean, if you know you've never committed a crime and you don't plan on it, then I guess it's worth the risk. I don't know if I would do that just because I would be afraid somebody would get it wrong, because that does happen. But they found you could find your distant relations and whatnot through there. So soon law enforcement, after the public started doing this, started utilizing that public database to help solve cases that wouldn't get hit on the FBI, wouldn't get hits on the FBI database. So they would look to the public databases in hopes of finding somebody, if not that person, then somebody related to that person, so that they could kind of triangulate down on their list of suspects, or maybe find a whole new suspect and figure out who it is, or figure out who victims are. It wasn't just for suspects, it was also for victims. So they ended up using Family Tree DNA, which was another public database that you could put your stuff in. And they ended up putting Pecos Jane's DNA into both of those databases, and Family Tree DNA is what turned up the best match, where they found 3 siblings in Texas. Not her siblings. They just found 3 people that were siblings. They determined, after doing all kinds of fancy mapping, that these 3 siblings were the great-grandchildren of one of Pecos Jane's first cousins.
So they found, begging pardon. So they found family, like Linky, find the family.
Mm-hmm. Now these family, they were like, these people probably don't even know who she is. It's her first cousin's great grandchildren. Like, chances are they don't know who this girl is. So let's go back and let's keep looking. So they furthered down their mapping and got to finally a family with 15 children from Kansas. They found that 10, via social media and other means, they found that 10 were still alive, that the parents had been deceased. And of those 10, they ended up shortly thereafter knocking on the door of a 74-year-old Joyce Hemme. Of course, when they said, hey, we're investigating a case from Pecos, Texas from 1966, and we were wondering, do you have any missing family? And understandably so, she started sobbing. And she had all kinds of information to give them, and they found her. They ended up doing an actual full match. And this is, I'm impressed by Pecos, Texas, and how much of themselves they gave to a person they didn't even know. And they didn't know was a potential, child. They thought she was in her 20s, or at least nearing it on 20. So I'm impressed and heartwarmed by Pecos, Texas. And I'm impressed by the technology and where we have come since 1966 of not having a single database of DNA to now we have several databases of DNA. Some of them are publicly run, and you can find where your second cousin went off to, or realize you have a second cousin living down the street. You can find that, or you can find a long lost loved one. You can find out who killed somebody. You can find out who, insert scenario, and you can find all that out now. Now it takes a lot of work because you kind of have to go between the databases.
I imagine it looks something like this.
Probably.
I imagine that's exactly what happens when they're trying to go through all those databases.
Trying to explain how they found Pecos Jane. That's what it looked like.
I mean, it's got to be really close, right? Good old Charlie. Thanks, buddy.
So it's impressive to me as how far we've come, and that no matter what, somebody was still looking for her until she was found. It was her family. It was whoever JCJ is, which, I mean, part of me hopes that it was Russell. If
that is your real name.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, but part of me hopes that it was him. Maybe he realized as he was getting older, I should come clean on this. I should just let them know, look further into this. Maybe just,
I mean, if
something.
he made it all the way, I kind of want to dive this rabbit hole for like 3 minutes.
Okay.
Just like 3 minutes of this rabbit hole. Let's pretend Russell was a coyote, right? And that was his whole job. He got Pecos Jane. He got Jolene. Jolene. He got Jolene to go along with him and do all these things. She found out that he was part of a cartel, something insane. And, he got rid of her. He did what he thought he had to do. And so the ballpoint pen on the bottom of the foot, he was literally identifying her for them. Like he was like, and he didn't really know.
But mind you, she was at the bottom of the pool while he was taking a nap.
Oh, I understand.
So the only scenario that I can think of that he would think that he's guilty and feel like he needs to run away is she's not known for being some great swimmer. So what if they got into an argument poolside? Okay.
Maybe.
They got into an argument poolside. He pushes her. She falls into the pool. And he just walks away. He pushes her and just walks away, goes back to the room, ends up falling asleep, taking a nap. And then come to find out she's at the bottom of the pool. And now he's like, oh, crap, they're going to blame me.
Right. She hit her head on the ladder. She fell down.
Anything.
Yeah, any number of things. I mean, he could have been an immigrant, anything. But if he's all the way in the Netherlands, I have to imagine, because he didn't just like fly into the Netherlands like, hey, I'm going to leave. Like,
I mean, we don't know how many stops. If that was him, we don't know how many stops he made along the way.
He continued to use some type of identification that allowed him, and he might have actually just used his real name at that point.
Maybe his real name was Jace.
Yeah, like he might have just started using his real name because, well, nobody knows who I am. I checked in under a pseudonym, a fake name.
I'm in my 80s now. I look a little different than I did in my 20s.
Right. Nobody's going to identify me. Maybe he started a brand new family. Maybe she was the side fling, and he didn't want to ruin all that, and so he was scared.
Yeah.
Which I'm not justifying Russell by any stretch of the imagination. That was absolutely a scumbag thing to do, period, the end. Whether it was accidental, on purpose, or otherwise, to not let the family know, hey, go look for your daughter.
Right.
That's a scumbag move.
That is definitely
You're already gone. That's a scumbag move.
Yeah.
And so no excuse there.
And to never, I mean, even if it was him, to wait that long to say something, I mean, scumbag move.
Right.
We're talking about Chris Watts all over again.
Worse. Not worse. Not even a little bit. No, Chris Watts, no.
No, Chris Watts was worse.
That he's the scum
because we don't know for
grows on
sure
the bottom of a scumbag.
We don't know for sure if Russell did have anything to do with it. Now his actions after label him scumbag, but we don't know if he actually had anything to do with this. Whereas Chris Watts tried to pretend his family was missing, and on the news. I'm so sad. Where's my
No,
family?
let's no.
But meanwhile,
he
he did it all.
drowned his daughters in vats of oil.
Yeah.
The other stuff, you can explain that away with fear. You can say not in your right mind. No, you drowned your daughters.
And he admits to having several opportunities to have not done it.
Oil. You are no.
Yeah. No.
No. Nope. Not getting. Nope. Not doing it again. There's a special place in hell for that man, and I hope when he goes, he gets it every day. And I know we're not supposed to wish that on anybody, but man, it's really hard not to. Russell's not in that category, as far as I'm aware.
As far as we're aware, obviously we're speculating, but that's part of the fun of doing the show is we get to speculate a little bit.
Don't forget to let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below.
What do you
know
think?
What you think.
What do you think happened? What do you think Russell or Joe or whatever his name was, what do you think his involvement was, or was he not involved and just scared and ran? You know, if you have opinions on that, by all means, down in the comments, let us know, because I would love to hear them. But this week is leading us to how we found the killer of our next episode, which is very exciting. That's this part of why when I first saw this whole story about Pecos Jane, I was reading through and I'm like, this is so fascinating. And then when I found out, I was like, that is kind of cool. And we need to talk about this. And so I wrote it down so that I'd be able to bring it up later on a show. And I knew that when I did Pecos Jane, I wanted to follow it up with this next one.
When research leads to other research, it's awesome.
Yes. It's the domino effect of research.
Whereas with the Geek Public Radio Show, we're like, no. We did research, but we don't really have to catalog Blizzard. We just know it's a garbage fire.
So like I said, I'm impressed with Pecos, Texas. I'm impressed with the people that came up with all of that DNA mapping and the DNA databases and the missing persons databases that they came up with that preceded the government doing it themselves. And at least they were smart enough, though, to pick up the people that originally came up with the idea to make it for the name us. So I'm impressed by the work that was done, the extra legwork that was put in. I mean, the police chief, the chief of police in Pecos, Tarango, she's a mom. So as soon as she heard the story, the first thing, of course, she's going to think is, what if this was my daughter? I need to find out more. And so she was driven. She was driven by the fact that she's a mother herself, and she can't imagine not going so long without knowing what happened to one of her kids if, God forbid, something were to happen to one of her kids. So, are you impressed?
With Pecos?
With anything.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts on all of it?
Yeah.
All of it all
like
together?
What's your summary thoughts?
Okay, so in summary, a couple of things for you kids out there who may be watching this show when you're not supposed to be. I mean, you can. This one's actually one of the more tame shows for the most part, so it's fine. When your parents tell you that a certain person gives them a bad vibe, or they say, hey, this
Same with
person's not
siblings.
good for you, or a sibling tells you that, don't be Pecos Jane. Don't be that person. Oh, no, it's fine. Now, granted, the 60s things were a little different, but
Yeah.
the same principle applies today. Sometimes, when you're deep in the woods, you can't see the forest dying around you, but people who aren't there and watching from the outside can clearly see it.
Yeah.
And this goes for adults, too. When people tell you
Hey, I got a bad vibe.
XYZ thing, you can weigh it against what you know versus what they don't know, or what they tell you, or what you tell them, right? So sometimes people form an opinion based on what you tell them, not on what they see.
Correct.
Which is very, very common. But in this case, when people tell you certain things, and it sounds like Jolene was giving information to her sister, and her sister was like, no, this doesn't sit right. You need to not do this.
Yeah.
This is not a good idea.
But she's young, dumb, and in love. I mean, that happens.
That absolutely happens.
Men and women alike, we're all there at least once.
We've all done dumb things when we definitely should not have done dumb things. And you're going to do dumb things, and that's okay. But
now, we also
smart.
don't know. I mean, she could have been forced to go on that trip.
Absolutely. Any number of things could have happened. But when you surround yourself with scumbag thing, and I'm not blaming her, so please don't misunderstand. Don't jump in the comment section and start, he's victim blaming. Don't do that. That's not what I'm doing. But if you can learn a lesson from it, if you're around scumbag people, scumbag things can happen. Mm-hmm. So just be careful. Mind who you hang out with. Understand what you're getting into. Listen when people who may be wiser than you give you or share with you that wisdom. Stop pretending like you know it all, because you probably don't.
I mean,
and also, Pecos,
I still don't know it all.
And Pecos, Texas is incredibly awesome, and I think they did a really great job, all things considered. Modern Pecos, Texas, I think. I mean, even back then, I think they did what they were trying to do. Even the community and things like that. That was really impressive, coming together the way that they did. Give her a proper burial, to pay their respects. The outpouring from the community, making national news, doing everything that they could to try to solve the issue, to try to fix the case. Now, other places, like, I don't know, the police department of Salina, or even in Kansas City,
should have been a little more on the ball.
Like, that's not hard to do, to poke around and be like,
or at least start a file and keep it somewhat handy.
Shame on them. Shame on them for, like, dropping the ball that bad. I understand that pot was a thing, and it still is, but it wasn't as strong as it is now. You don't really have an excuse to not. You couldn't have been so stoned that you couldn't have filed a report. That's not a thing. And if it is a thing, you should be ashamed. So shame on you.
Well, more than one person should really be looking at
And Russell is a scumbag. That's pretty much my closing thoughts.
He's in a scumbag party.
And I'm super glad that this case was resolved, and that the family at some point in their life finally got some closure.
Right.
Mom and Dad found it at the end of their lives, but I'm glad that her sister was able to get the closure that she needs, and that the family could lay her to rest in peace. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So the exhumation, obviously led to them returning the remains to the family. So that's it for Pecos Jane. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope that maybe you'll be joining us again for our next episode, so you can find out how we find killers. So thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me, Crazy Chris.
Always a pleasure.
Please be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel, so that way you can get all of our content whenever we release it. And you can also go to geekpublicradio.com and get a membership for $5 a month, where we have videos, short videos, reviews, all kinds of stuff for just $5 a month. And if you have any suggestions for the show, then please be sure to go ahead and put them in the comments. And before I fully sign off here today, I do want to say congratulations to the Black Book. My producer, who's not here, that's why Chris is doing the job, and
I am the producer now.
He was actually one of the producers, writers, directors of the Black Book, and they submitted it to the Gen Con Film Festival and won Best Feature Film for the Gen Con Film Festival of 2021. I am so proud of them. The movie is great, so if you wanted to check that out, I highly recommend it. It's also a book, so you can check that out. I think the movie's $10 and the book's $10. Is that correct, Chris? And so yeah, it's really good. They did a really good job on it. They poured a lot of their hearts into it, and I was thoroughly impressed. And I'm not usually thoroughly impressed by independent films. I'm more of a need all the flashes and whatever. I'm
You need the Michael Bay explosions. And
I'm too easy to entertain when it comes to
Explosions.
movies. So it tends to be anything that's more complex, something that's more involved, something that's more. For some reason, I just don't really grasp it, in
Sure.
enjoyment wise. But this one, I first saw it at Black Book in the Park, and I was bummed by all the ambient lighting kind of ruining it. And
It did. It was a fun event. It was really great. Went
it
off
was.
great.
It was a great event. And so I got to kind of see it there, but I got to watch it at Gen Con, which was far more exciting. And Gen Con's kind of why we didn't have a show last week, because I was still recovering. So
It's a thing.
it's unfortunately it's a thing.
And don't forget too, if you're more of the Audible crowd and you don't want to read the book and you don't really want
yes.
to watch the movie, don't have time, the Audible's available, voiced by yours truly, and
Yes.
it's actually free if you sign up for an Audible account. And there's a special thing that you have to do, but you can go to blackbookmovie.com, click the Audible link, and you'll sign up for an Audible, and you can actually get the Black Book for free. So, and also, make sure to go to Amazon after you purchase said thing and leave us a 5-star review. So that way we can be pushed up the charts, because that's what we're doing right now. So we're trying to make this thing bigger.
They're working
and better.
hard, and it shows that it's paying off, and I'm very proud of them.
Yes. Thank you.
Crazy Chris is actually in the movie, and he also helped with sound and whatnot, right?
All right, sound, it's grip work. I was the star. Period. I mean, I'm gonna take my bow.
Well,
right now.
I don't know.
was the
I feel
star.
like Ari Lehman has a little more star power than you.
He was pretty good. I'll give it to him.
So Ari Lehman, if you don't know, was the original Jason. So
The first Jason.
the first one, the original, he was
Also his band
the OG. So he's in it as well, and it's exciting. So definitely go check it out. But thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, please like and subscribe so that way you can get more of our content, and hit the bell so you don't miss out. And go ahead and check out geekpublicradio.com. That $5 a month membership gets you all kinds of exclusive content that we love to put out for you guys.
And it goes to us making more award-winning movies for your enjoyment.
This is true. So thank you for joining in and tuning into Geek Public Radio. This is Jassel with your Criminal Fix.